Thanks very much, Magnus. You set the bar high for me there. Good stuff. All right, so talking about the sports media landscape is a funny one for me because it's gone through a lot over the last few years. So 5, 6 years ago, sports got super excited about the opportunity of going direct to consumer and B2C. Historically, sports has been built on being a B2B industry, selling its licensing and rights to third-party organizations, and then cashing in, and then just worrying about the stuff that happens on the field. But about 10 years ago, it started looking at direct-to-consumer as an exciting area, but the problem was that they had no one in the industry who actually knows how to do direct-to-consumer. And over the last few years, the sports industry as a whole has been trying to move into this direct-to-consumer approach, but it's found a little bit more challenging than they expected it to be. And now we're starting to see a lot more of the streaming players, the big platforms, come back to sports and start bringing them back into their own ecosystems again. So I'm going to dig over the next 20 minutes or so into that landscape. Now, I just want to get a sense of the room here. Who works heavily in sport? Put your hand up. Cool, okay, a few people. That is enough. The rest of you will have, I can say whatever I want, and you won't know if I'm lying or not. So let's get straight into it. So I work for a company called SportsPro. SportsPro is a publisher that covers the business of sports with a big focus on digital media in the industry. We produce about 50, 60 stories on the business of sports every week. And we also run events in 5 different countries, and the next one being in Madrid, where about 1,000 people will come together to talk about digital media and OTT in the sports space. Myself, I'm Australian, and that's why I talk funny English, and have worked in the industry for about nearly 20 years across both sports and media, and been with SportsPro for 13 years of those. I also sit on the board of British Volleyball, run a weekly podcast called Stream Time, which covers all of these aspects, both from interviewing people and deep dives into the thematics around digital streaming and sports. And I think it's about my 25th trip to Sweden, yet my second time I've been to Stockholm only. And the other time I was here to watch the Rolling Stones in action. So good to finally be able to come for business for a change. Otherwise I'm stuck in Gislaved, which is a small little town on the west coast. If you're from Sweden, then you may or may not even know where that is. Right, so talking about streaming more generally, most people will probably look at the big streaming players and see there's a pretty similar playbook in place. You're talking about building your own centralized platform, mix of subscriptions and advertising, expansion into FAST, mix of original archive content, being on as many devices as possible, and losing a shitload of money as you go along. When the streaming players look at sports, particularly they're looking towards tier 1 sports properties, they get excited by the fact that it attracts lots of subscribers, it reduces churn, it drives up pricing models that they can charge to consumers. It also attracts premium advertisers who are looking for those tentpole moments, but it is still really hard to deliver and also costs a shitload of money to buy. But for sports, there is no playbook. Almost every single sports property has a slightly different approach to how they approach the media industry, and indeed how they approach using their live and non-live sports rights. Most of it is to do with one thing, and that is money. Now, when we talk about media rights, a lot of people see very big numbers in the coverage. $55 billion is roughly the annual amount of money spent in the world to buy sports rights. But that sounds like a big number, but if you think about all the sports and pro leagues that exist in the world, only 11 sports properties take about 70% of that income. Over half of that revenue just comes from the US marketplace alone. And in fact, when we talk about streaming a lot, and the big streaming players across Europe, actually only Amazon and DAZN, as streaming first players, have actually bought premium sports rights in this market. And instead, we're just seeing streaming being an extension of more of the incumbents in the space. Now, going a little bit of a step further, when we look at how the breakdown of revenue looks, after you go past the US, it's all pretty flat. A few that I wanted to highlight is actually, firstly, that 99% of that revenue sticks with live sports rights. The only example that I can think of, which is a meaningful investment into non-live sports rights, is that the BBC, the public service broadcaster in the UK, has a $200 million deal in place for the Premier League for its highlight rights, so about 60-70 million a year that they pay. And I don't think there's any other examples that exist anywhere with that sort of investment into highlights. The Premier League is also interesting because it's the only sports property in the world that generates more income from its international sports rights than it does from its domestic sports rights, although that may change in the next right cycle. UFC and WWE, I've put them together. They've just merged. For those that didn't know, they've become part of the Endeavour business, which is a big, massive media and sports and entertainment agency. And I wanted to highlight Australia, not just because I'm Australian, but because the market is about $1 billion in media rights every year. And if you think about the population of Australia, it's about 25 million people. So if my maths is correct, that's about $40 ARPU from every single person in the entire population, making it one of the most profitable dollar-for-dollar markets that exist in this space. And now, after you go past all those major sports leagues, the rest of the entire industry is fighting for that last $4 billion in the market. Now, when I talk about sports, often I hear a lot of people generalize when they talk about sports. They go, oh, well, sports does this, or football does that. Well, yes, but actually you have to look at it in more of a bit of a different approach. And I've tried to tier them up or group them up into 3 buckets. One is Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, which is the bankers, the reachers, and the have-nots. Now, the bankers are the ones that move the needle for streamers and broadcasters. They get people coming to their platforms. Their core revenue stream is the media rights revenue that I've just talked about. They often will sell to the highest bidder with some consideration around reach when appropriate. But now what we're seeing is that more and more of them who have historically, almost all of them have looked at OTT and doing it themselves, have now started to hand back over those rights to major streaming partners and do deals with them instead. They are still focused on going direct to consumer, but just not around live sports rights at the moment. Some of them have offerings, but it isn't a priority. And there's countless examples I could give with every single one up on the screen that have done deals with major platforms to sell off their streaming rights that they had historically within the business. Worth noting that the Premier League and the next one I'm going to talk about in a second have never had an OTT platform in the market. And one other one to mention quickly is WWE, because WWE is, technically not a sport, obviously, but it's an entertainment product. They had one of the best streaming platforms in the industry. They won awards at Our Awards, and then they decided in the US to do a 5-year, $1 billion deal with Peacock, the NBC-owned platform, to handle all their rights to NBC, and instead move their library completely into their platform and literally shut down their OTT product in the US, which sent shockwaves through the sports industry because everyone was looking to them at how great they were going direct to consumer with live sports or live entertainment, and it didn't play out that way. Now, pop quiz, who owns the world record for live sports concurrent viewers? Anyone want to have a go? I think, are you British? English? Good, okay, yes, then let's go. IPL, yes, correct. I'm just checking because if you like cricket, that would be too easy. The IPL, the Indian Premier League, has been a real case study to follow, particularly over the last few months. They restructured their sports rights strategy to actually go non-exclusive with some of their rights content, meaning they were selling a dedicated streaming product and a dedicated linear product. What that led to was a 120% increase in media rights revenues. And now per game makes the value of those rights almost at the level of the NFL. Now, it's worth noting the IPL is only a 2-month tournament. Yet they're generating almost as much revenue as all the major sports leagues in the world. Now, you might not be surprised that they have the record for concurrent viewers. They are in a market like India, where that is probably expected. But it's worth noting that 32 million concurrent is alongside the pay TV audience, which has been up of nearly 50 million concurrent, or average AMA, I think, at the same time in some of the broadcasts they've been running over this last event. Their audiences are skyrocketing, and streaming is playing a huge role in that. Geo Cinema, which is a joint venture or an initiative with Viacom 18, is leading that. And what's unique about it is, shock, they are offering it for free and people are watching. The industry has been so focused on building subscriptions and paywalls that next to none of the premium content is available on streaming free in front of a paywall. That's led to huge audiences, and now they're seeing an appetite for advertisers for the first time to tap into that huge audience, and they're getting huge revenues from that. Now, that being said, as you can see, the average revenue per user is still under $1 per person. but it helps when you've got the scale of an audience like they do. Right, quick shout out to F1. F1 also had one of the best platforms in the market from an OTT perspective, and still do. Their F1 TV Pro product is well regarded by lots of people I've even spoken to in the last few days. But what's interesting, I think, is just to know how the power of some of these broadcasters can be, in that they, as Sky Sports, have prevented the F1 TV Pro product of being available in the UK. So none of those TV Pro assets have been available to the entire UK market, which is arguably its core market. Now, they have just renewed their deal, and Sky is now going to take some of those assets and integrate it into their own product. But it just goes to show where the power sits. It's often with the broadcaster. And interestingly, F1 is not the only person to do this. They are broadcasting some of their races on YouTube as their linear proposition. And that's a legal requirement in Germany, that some of their racing is available free to air or linear. And YouTube is being that platform for them, as well as in the UK, where BT Sport has done that with the UEFA Champions League final, which they have been running year on year, available on YouTube as their free-to-air proposition. Now, talking about the tier twos, the reachers, they don't get much money from media rights. They get a little bit. Most of their revenue comes from sponsorships and partnerships. Streaming is more about trying to get the scale of audience, and the revenues are relatively as low. And they are all about just getting as much coverage as they can. They all have differing approaches on OTT and D2C, and that's kind of the muddled middle of the industry of those major leagues. The tier threes are the ones that don't get offered media rights deals. They typically have next to no media rights coverage. If they do, it's at next to zero revenue. But they can build OTT products and propositions that, if they're done with efficiency and with expectation management, can be quite a profitable part of the business. But sponsorship revenue is super tough for this group because they don't have the scale of reach that the others do. Volleyball World's an interesting example. Volleyball World is the International Federation of Volleyball's commercial arm that was invested into by CVC. CVC Capital used to own Formula One, and they gave him $100 million, although initial reports were 300. It's, I think, apparently only a fraction of that. But they've tried to build what they call the Netflix of volleyball. Netflix of sport has been a term used for DAZN and others in the past that has not played out. But they're trying it, and they're making some headway. They are buying actually professional volleyball sports rights and doing media rights deals and making a single destination for live and premium volleyball. What's interesting, though, is how hard their paywall is. So they have a very hard paywall, next to no live content available in front of it. And they're laser focused on using social media for highlights and attracting that sort of second tier, third tier fan. And instead, their priority from a commercialization perspective is driving top tier fans of volleyball to their paid product, because they believe it's grossly under-monetized. And they are managing all the production, all the strategy and distribution themselves. Now, so the key takeaways from all of that is there isn't a playbook for sports. Stream plays a varying role for all of them, and monetization is really tough for those underneath the tier ones. All the money sits at the top, and everyone's fighting it out for the middle. Now, I've been waffling on for quite a while now, but I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit towards the debates, priorities, and challenges about how we're looking at the way sports is broadcast and distributed through streaming platforms and media. The first one is latency. Just how important is it? Do you have to be safe, or is it absolutely imperative that you go ultra-low latency? I think the example I've put up on the screen with YouTube TV is a great example of where the industry is today, where they will not give up on the quality of experience over trying to cut down latency, even for a product like NFL Sunday Ticket that is built around being as low latency as you would expect. So I do hear a lot of people pushing latency needs to come down. There's the conversation around betting and its importance. But it's not as important as people think, because the betting revenue for a sports property isn't directly correlated with the amount of deals and bets in play in the same way that, say, advertising is on cost per click. So the deals are done, negotiated, hands are shook, and then they renegotiate a few years later. If they were to change that model, it might change the conversation around latency quite a lot. One-stop shops are all the focus now. So a lot of those big tier sports properties are moving away from focusing on building dedicated OTT platforms, but they are focusing on creating a single, genuine destination for fans. The big two that launched last year were the NBA and FIFA Plus. And you're going to hear probably a little bit more about NBA shortly after this. but they focus on creating a complete experience, which is around non-live, maybe some live as well, but also editorial output, perhaps gamification and fantasy sports and alike. A lot of positivity around that concept and that model, but it hasn't been without some challenges in terms of whether it's been the distribution of the live content through those networks, or just building a platform that can be constantly evolving as it needs to after the initial rollout. But they are very much the benchmark for a lot of the industry and what they're looking towards. Lean in versus lean back experiences are always an interesting one. Does sports need to be engaging? Do you need to be engaging with it actively, or is it okay to be sitting back and just chilling and watching the sports live? I think there's a lot of debate around this one, and what the role of the mobile phone device. Does it actually need to be in the live sports experience, or is it just there alongside people that they can dip in and out of that live experience, even if it is on their TV the whole time? The role of betting, that's another form of leaning in experience. I think it's just interesting to think about in the comparison between the European and US markets. In US, they are so excited about betting. Oh, it's going to change the industry. It's a great form of fan engagement. And you look to Europe, well, they're shutting down a lot of the opportunities for betting players in live sports because betting can be harmful to society. So interesting to see how that plays out. The US is all guns blazing in this space, and it's only going to be seeing a huge increase in, I think it's in the tens and tens of billions of bets being transacted over in that market. Now, this one's an interesting one, I think, for this group. I don't know, for those who've been to London, mind the gap you hear a lot when you're going onto the tube. There's a big gap and disparity between the sports world and broadcast and the broadcast tech vendors and the knowledge of each other's respective spaces. Typically, the sports people and executives who are tasked with coming up with an OTT and streaming strategy have never worked in the OTT or streaming or broadcast world. And then you go to the other side, you have the broadcast industry who have been living and breathing this space of their whole lives, but don't really understand the way world sports works, and more about the nuance on how to educate them on what path to take. And this divide in knowledge on these guys know more sports and less broadcast, these guys know about broadcast, less sports, creates a huge challenge to bridge, where most of the major tech companies are looking at the industry and going, we can solve all these problems. But why the sports industry keeps saying no to us? Because they don't really know what they're doing in a lot of instances. And they do really need their hand held. And this gap is still a constant challenge, although it is getting bridged a little bit now. We're still obviously seeing major challenges on delivering delivering at scale for the big events. The streaming that I mentioned for IPL with Geo Cinema, super successful, but what I actually did start to hear about the IPL was that their streaming product was free, did have some challenges in delivery, and was actually driving people to the pay TV provider because they wanted a better experience and were ready to pay for it. Netflix have had challenges. Apple, who recently bought the MLS, so went global, had a global rights deal with Major League Soccer in the US, had some challenges, have had to reduce some of the complexities on their product. Amazon, Thursday Night Football, had problems on initial launch, and DAZN in Italy. Now, for those does everyone familiar with this story? Who's not familiar with this, with DAZN in Serie A? Cool. So they basically bought the rights to the biggest sports property in Italy. Then they launched the product and had massive challenges. Pretty much every year the season has begun. They've had authentication issues, CDN issues, connection issues, and everyone's pointing fingers at each other as to why these things have happened. They were even summoned to meet government ministers to talk about what was going on, because such is the importance of football in that market. And they were told they had to refund people by the government. So again, yet another example that even when you have a great platform and perhaps a great strategy, that even in a mature Western market, there are still challenges in delivering at scale. Piracy is a fun one. We're going to hear a bit more about that later on. But sometimes you hear people that they'll just talk about piracy as, yep, we're really focused on doing whatever we can to minimize it. Others that think it's more like a stock take issue, that they're just expecting 5% loss of their stock to piracy, and the rest they'll just worry about making the best from the people that are willing to pay for it. But quick facts and figures, there's from a report done by Cinemedia and Ampere Analysis, was that there was roughly $28 billion worth of lost revenue in piracy per year on sports content. 28 billion, that's more than 50% extra revenue on what was being made across the entire ecosystem. I have heard numbers from another platform that works in pay-per-view, and they said as many as 14 times the amount of people were watching illegally to watching legally in one of their pay-per-view events. I have not had that confirmed. I did ask. They didn't tell me that. I got told over a drink, so I can't confirm who that was. But yeah, it's an interesting place. It's not going away. It's getting worse, as you're going to hear probably a bit more about later on. But one of the other parts of the study was that 74% of users are willing to pay. They don't actually mind paying for it if they're offered what they want, which is another conversation altogether. Another big one for us with sports is the role of linear as a platform. Historically, it was the home of live sports. It's what created fandom across mass community. Linear does not really play a role in top-tier sports anymore. In fact, social media kind of takes that role by being the platform for highlights and a way of engaging people at the top of the audience funnel. Some people wonder and hope maybe fast channels might bring this back to life again. Time will tell. Monetization of fandoms are a big one that I like to talk about, that live versus non-live. As I said, 99% of the revenue in media rights is attributed to live sports rights, yet most of the younger generation, or a good chunk of the younger generation, prefers is the important word here, prefers to watch non-live content and highlights. It's not that they're doing it, they're preferring it. So again, the disparity here of where all the money is built around a live product, yet there's actually people out there that would rather watch in highlights and they don't have to pay a penny for it. And then sports never gets any income off the back of that directly. Remote and cloud production, you're going to probably hear a little bit more about that. More people are focused on it. There was a lot of innovation across the industry through the COVID. That sort of calmed down, and now we're seeing actually some of that take a step back. But now people are starting to spend a bit more time on working out how they can lean more into the cloud. I think ESPN did their first end-to-end cloud production last year for a college event, and that seemed to have gone really well. So I think you're just going to see more people focus on cost savings across the industry, particularly around live sports. And finally, fragmentation and discoverability. I could talk about this stuff all day, but basically sports has been splicing and dicing at sports rights in the MLB, Major League Baseball. They've given up their rights to about 8 different broadcasters. Magnus was gave me an example that he heard that someone wanted to watch a game, the Yankees play, and they had to subscribe to 5 services to watch a game in 1 week. That's a problem, and that has a problem for fans, and also there's a problem of fans not knowing where to go. So that's a big issue the industry is not facing head on yet. So really, finally, money solves everything, right? Ultimately, if sports works out how to make more money from all these areas, they will be in a better place. The expectations are that streaming was supposed to be just a home run hit, lots of money coming in. Hasn't been as easy as that. I'm interested to see how ad tech will play a role in direct-to-consumer. It's obviously becoming more prevalent in more mainstream streaming platforms. Will it play a role at the lower end at scale? Will e-commerce really drive up ARPUs? Will sports find its super aggregator Spotify moment? Will the big guys come in for lowest tier sports? Will they start investing into lower sports properties? Can sports monetize non-live finally? That's going to be a challenge. Or will someone like YouTube be the solution? It's worth noting that YouTube is coming for sports and sports hard. It's coming for the whole sports and entertainment industry in Europe. They launched the YouTube primetime product in the US last year. They're going to be launching in Europe. And obviously YouTube is already the #1 platform in the US in consumption and connected TVs. So they're already playing a huge role. And they have the best relationship with any consumer because they are people consuming on YouTube every single day and not just around live content. And they're really laser focused on driving commerce, so e-commerce pay-per-view subs in 1 or 2 clicks. Think about the current user experience on how to sign up to some of these products now. So expect YouTube to play a really big role in live sports and non-live for many years to come. That's it for me. Thanks very much, everyone.